I've just met the most incredible people that can budget like you wouldn't believe, can cook and grow and create, but all of that still doesn't, it's not the fix. It doesn't alleviate food insecurity and that sort of weekly, monthly, yearly struggle to feed themselves and their family.
We spend a lot of time on Dirty Linen talking about food that's abundant and delicious, food that we choose to eat, but it's a really tricky landscape for so many people in our community, with around 15% of people experiencing food insecurity every year, and things are getting harder, not easier, for so many people. Our guest today is Dr Rebecca Lindberg. She is a postdoctoral research fellow in the Faculty of Health at Deakin University. Rebecca, welcome to Dirty Linen.
Thanks for having me, Dani.
We're speaking after the recent occasion of the relaunch of the Community Grocer in Carlton Market at the Carlton Public Housing Estate. Let's start there. What's the Community Grocer?
Yeah, the Community Grocer is a not-for-profit social enterprise that runs affordable fresh fruit and vegetable markets in communities that are at risk of food insecurity. And rather wonderfully, on Friday afternoon, the last Friday in spring, we were able to relaunch our Friday market in Carlton after we had a winter hiatus because, that COVID pandemic knocked our market and our community around. So we had to take a brief pause, but it was so wonderful to bring the market back on Friday.
So who is the market for, and what can those people get there?
So the market is set up like quite a typical fresh fruit and vegetable market. There's beautiful products, often sourced to be in line with the cultural needs or particular festivals that are happening in the communities that regularly shop there. So you can get, wonderful products that you might not see in mainstream greengrocers or retail outlets. And as you said, Dani, that Carlton market in particular is set up at the high-rise estate just off Lygon Street. So there is definitely a focus on communities that are at a greater risk of food insecurity or experiencing financial distress, but it's also a market for everybody. And in fact, the more customers that shop at our market, the easier it is for us to, make a little profit that we can then divert back into the organisation. So we operate out of 2 different high-rise estates and also in outer Melbourne in a community centre in Pakenham.
And is the food subsidised? Is that what makes it affordable and a useful service for these people?
Yes, it is. It's subsidised, and really we need philanthropic and government funding or our fundraising efforts. That's what helps with the subsidies to keep the prices low and affordable, whilst at the same time paying our wholesalers, paying the suppliers that obviously we buy the products, and any of that income that we do generate or the subsidies that are able to come in through our philanthropic funding and government funding, they cover our staffing costs, our communication and website management, and the awareness raising and the community development work that we do around the market. So it's a market, but it's so much more than a market.
What are some of the social benefits beyond, the simple fact of taking home a bag of food of such a market?
Our prices are 24 to 30% cheaper than those that are in the sort of surrounding outlets. We do an annual evaluation of the local food environment. So it is simple, as you say, but it's powerful to ensure that people have access to healthy, nutritious food at prices that they can afford. And it means about 50,000 serves of fruit and veggies every year. But also, we're really a culturally diverse community. We serve 17 different nationalities across our markets, and so customers come and they swap recipes and discuss with our staff and volunteers and with one another's about, how they use the different food products. And it's really about social inclusion as well. And 86% of our customers do report that they feel more connected to the community because they come down for a shop and a chat and that recipe swap. And except for this more difficult period over the pandemic, but what we're working towards for next year and what we've done in the past is other activation activities around our market. So it might be music, it might be drinking tea or coffee, it might be a community barbecue. So those wraparound activities that, they bring life to markets. So people want to come and, have a chat, let their kids play at a local playground and have a cup of tea with a neighbour.
And how does this fit into what you do at Deakin? Like, why is a health researcher helping with a market?
I did start my kind of time with the Community Grocer with quite a focus on data and evaluation. So how we can take those annual snapshots of, say, food costs locally, or how we can get customer feedback with validated and reliable tools, with junior researchers in the form of dietitian students from Monash University that do placement with the Community Grocer every year. So really, it was more the research and development focus that I kind of took on when I first joined the Community Grocer, so that it had an evidence base to drive its decision making and to prove its impact for funders and other stakeholders. But just this year, I actually started as the chair along with Leah Galvin. So we have this really wonderful opportunity to now do more, strategic work with the organisation, and I now have a bigger role in governance. So I really enjoy the mix, actually. Being a researcher, as you say, I spend a lot of time at a desk. I spend a lot of time crunching data and doing somewhat dry work. But, mornings like Friday where I was out in community, seeing everyone buy affordable fresh fruit and veggies, that's just such a lovely anecdote to all of this solo time we have and all this time with the computer. So I find that it works quite well having those two hats.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've been scanning, I haven't been reading all your publications, I have to fess up on that, but I've been reading the titles, which is a start. And I mean, there's so much that I would love to ask you to dig into for us. You talked about policies around reducing sugar. You've talked around the stigma around food assistance. You've talked about structural violence in the lived experience of food insecurity, and about government policies that facilitate healthy diet-related practices. I mean, I suppose like when you just read all that out, you sort of feel like this experience of supplying oneself with food is really so intertwined with so many other aspects of society. What are some of the big issues that stand out for you in terms of food insecurity, healthy eating, and social inclusion?
Well, the big issues are, probably more broadly linked to how we tackle poverty and injustice in a place like Australia. And I guess food is a bit of a litmus test for that. So some of the policy priorities that people like myself and others that work in this kind of community food and public health nutrition space, what we love to see some progress on is, a better standard of living for those that are relying on job seeker or single parent allowance. We just know that the incomes that many Australians are reliant on, they're not sufficient enough to afford a decent diet, and often food is the elastic item in the household budget. Like you have the fixed price of your gas bills or of school fees or mortgage repayments or other comparable outgoings. But food, when you go to the supermarket or you shop at the Community Grocer, 1 week it might be $150 for the household, but the next week that's what can sort of shrink, and so a big ticket policy item that could have universal benefit for household food security. It's not a food solution. It's actually an income solution, and it's about ensuring people have a decent standard of living for those that are reliant on Centrelink and Social Security. But of course, those that are in wages as well experience food insecurity, and so we need an adequate standard of living for people that are in waged work and fair wages for those that are on low incomes and precarious work environments.
Yeah, I mean, that really resonates with me. I feel it's similar to, people are told, well, this is how you can save at the store, or why don't you grow some of your own food? Why are you going through drive-through? Like, it's all this sort of personal responsibility that is lumped on people who perhaps don't have reduced funds and therefore are stressed and not perhaps inclined to plant some pumpkin seedlings. It's sort of that reversion to personal responsibility when it's actually a structural issue for the most part is so frustrating. And it's the same with sustainability solutions, I guess, where it's like, yeah, sure, walk to the tram, but what about these macro government policies that, are fueling the world with, literally with fossil fuels. So, I mean, it feels like cutting across all kinds of disciplines, whether it's, health or climate. A lot would be solved with a universal basic income banning billionaires, for example.
I'd vote for that, Dani.
Where do we go from there?
I mean, the good news is that, I'm not alone, and many recognise that, the necessity of, say, raising the rate, and we have seen a little bit of progress on that issue. We also have our very first inquiry into food security in the domestic kind of context, which is underway at the moment from the Department of Agriculture. I think we're seeing some good progress from a national monitoring of household food security through the Australian Bureau of Statistics and the Department of Health. Instead of just relying on sort of, one or two pretty basic questions when they go out and they ask households what's happening in terms of your health and your food, in the kind of coming year or two, we're going to get a much better comprehensive insight into the level of food insecurity for adults, not for children, unfortunately. And, of course, I'm very passionate about innovative, community-based innovation like the Community Grocer that focus on dignity, that focus on choice, that focus on nutrition and working with and for communities. So that's sort of ground up. And then I suppose those universal or those kind of government-led national initiatives that I've spoken to are sort of top down. And I do think it could be a bit of a silver lining of the pandemic or, inflation and more discussion about cost of living pressures. If we can keep up that conversation and it stays in the media and on the policy agenda, that might mean that we can make some breakthrough and progress on addressing and better responding to food insecurity in the Australian context. So I do think there's hope, but big picture issues around equity, around climate change and justice, and around addressing some of those really ingrained, issues around, colonialism in Australia and racism and refugees and asylum seekers, who's in and who's out. I mean, these are the communities that are the most impacted by food insecurity. In Indigenous Australian communities, it's something like 1 in 4 households. And it's not a food issue. As I said before, it's very much linked to these social and economic and political issues that are the underlying drivers of food insecurity. insecurity. They're the underlying causes of why, mums and dads struggle to think about, what they're going to feed their kids over the weekend or the school holiday period, the festive season, which is coming up. The interviews that I've done with people, they say this is not a joyous time of the year. This is an incredibly stressful time of year that's typically conceptualized as a time of abundance, as a time of gathering around food, as, kind of hyper consumerism. But for many people, they feel that it's the opposite.
There was a piece that went around a few weeks ago. Virginia Trioli wrote about it and spoke about it on ABC Radio about a mum who picked up some yogurt from Food Bank and asked if it was okay for her to keep it beyond the use-by date because she was thinking she might serve it to her kids as a treat for Christmas. And I think that really shone a light on the desperation or the desperate straits that a lot of people are in for those who are more fortunate. But it is certainly a time when, certainly not everybody's out ordering a ham.
Yes, I did see that story, and it's not unique, but it was fantastic that it got coverage and devastating at the same time, Dani.
So I noticed one of the stories, or one of the articles that you contributed to was in the Journal of Poverty and Social Justice, and it was around the stigma of emergency and community food assistance, this idea that beggars can't be choosers. Can you talk about food relief and dignity and how those things tie together?
Yeah, look, I can speak about it both through my research and also, as a professional who's worked in and with emergency food relief organisations for, the last 15 years. And it's such a tricky issue because on the one hand, you've got, incredibly motivated volunteers or philanthropists or food businesses that are, donating or giving surplus food to this emergency food sector, which is growing in size. I've done some work to really look at the tonnage that goes up and up and up each year across the emergency food system with, large organisations like Food Bank Australia and Second Bite and Oz Harvest, etc. And then, those frontline agencies as well, the St Vincent's and Salvation Armies and local church groups. So it's a sign that community members are outraged by hunger and they want to help their neighbours and they don't want food that is fit for human consumption and that's good quality and that might otherwise have gone to waste. They want to capture it and safely redistribute it to people. And that is, on the one hand, really wonderful. But on the other hand, through talking to people that are recipients that need to plug into this emergency food system, again and again I hear about the inefficiencies in the system, that cultural needs and dietary requirements and preferences for nutrition don't get reflected in the food that is supplied. Very rarely there is choice. Often it is, a pre-prepared hamper of mainly processed, non-perishable food, not the sorts of foods that you often want to organise a celebration around, or if you had your choice, they're not the sorts of foods that you'd walk into a supermarket or another retail space and buy. And so, it's really from spending time with community members, first and foremost, that I began to problematise, I guess, emergency food and became thirsty to work on alternatives that did really focus on community consultation, on dignity achieved through choice, achieved through creating environments that look like, quote unquote, normal and socially acceptable food environments like the Community Grocer market. And then I guess in my kind of scholarly work, there is, a body of evidence, or these kind of critical public health thinkers that suggest actually, the growth of charities should necessarily be celebrated, that in fact they might even be hiding hunger or letting governments and others off the hook for creating the conditions that perpetuate hunger and food insecurity in places like Australia, and they might, even inadvertently, make it look like that the problem is solved, when the evidence to the contrary it can be something as simple as even the more tonnes that these guys move and the bigger that these food charities get, unfortunately, it doesn't trigger, a lessening of food insecurity across high-income countries.
Yeah, wow. I have so many thoughts. I think the macro one is that this problem of food waste is just, in some ways, it's just another can that's kicked down the road, in the same way that fast fashion is kicked down the road to the op shop, or soft plastics are kicked down the road to the now not operating soft plastics bin, to create warehouses full of soft plastics that are not going anywhere. So there's that side of it where it's just about responsibility. It's about what is the end of life of the product that is being produced. But it also, just on a micro level, it makes me think of a story I read recently about one of those, by the sounds of it, really fantastic apps that allow people to turn up to a deli or a cafe and pick up leftover stuff at the end of the day, whether it's muffins, it's often muffins, donuts, salads or whatever. And you can find out on the app where you can get that stuff, and you can go and pick it up for a minimal cost or for free. But then the person who was writing this article took it home, and she just honestly had too many donuts, too many for herself, too many for the neighbours, and that some of them were a bit squashed. They didn't really seem like a good Prezi to give the little kids next door. And in the end, that food still went in the bin.
Yeah, I mean, your macro parallels, I think you're exactly right around plastic and other sort of environmentally sustainable, issues. And I've definitely also interviewed people that said, well, what do I do with, three bags of potatoes that are just about to go off? And what am I supposed to do when my child is gluten intolerant and we keep getting pasta, from the local food pantry? So just because the waste is moved on, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is indeed addressing people's hunger needs or stocking pantries. And at the same time, people do creative things. They can pass on to their neighbours, or repurpose. And in fact, I've just met the most incredible people that can budget like you wouldn't believe, can cook and grow and create, but all of that still doesn't, it's not the fix. It doesn't alleviate food insecurity and that sort of weekly, monthly, yearly struggle to feed themselves and their family.
Yeah, and I'd say creativity is something that's very hard to muster when you're living in constant stress. It's almost, sometimes it would feel like the burden was being passed on to you rather than what you were being given, alleviating your problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And the time that people need to spend, going to the outlet store on a Sunday because there's great deals, and then going to a fresh food market on a Tuesday because, that's when the price discounting happens, and then looking in the catalogues for the best buys and getting a voucher, lining up for it, waiting on the phone to see if they can book into a particular service because they've just, scraped over their 3 months and they're eligible again for another parcel. Like the phenomenal time cost that goes into managing, living off the smell of an oily rag to feed yourself is absolutely phenomenal, let alone, as you say, that getting the creative juices going to, make an amazing Sunday meal. That's not a luxury that many people can afford when they're managing food insecurity. This other piece of yours about structural violence and food insecurity, can you tell me what that's about? Yeah, it's such a catchy kind of emotive idea, structural violence, and it's about thinking about, structures, I guess, in society that cause harm. And not that they necessarily deliberately do it. There's not some evil overlord that's kind of making particular decisions to cause harm in society. It can be, more, inadvertent than that decisions that can be made, by our government, by those that are in positions of power, the effect that it can have on people's lives might be harmful. And so in this particular study, I looked at people's experiences in Centrelink, where they spent their time, and also people who spent time in food charities. So it was a really large study. We focused on a whole lot of things. People who were food insecure living in the state of Victoria. We did interviews with them, but for this structural violence inquiry, I wanted to basically know, what is it like when people kind of spend time in these settings where there's been policy decisions and, decisions made about how to address food waste and how to tackle food insecurity and how to tackle, living in poverty or living without a job. I wanted to understand, well, what is it like when you walk through the door at those services? What are the sorts of experiences you have? And unfortunately, what was fairly uniform across these interviews is that people felt that there was a lot of demeaning experiences, that they were sort of deprived an adequate standard of living in those experiences, in those settings as well.
Rebecca, I wonder what you think about restaurants, cafes, pubs. There's a lot of people that are engaged with that part of the food world that listen to this podcast. Do you think that they have a place in helping to fix things, or at least, I don't know, distract people from the issues at any point?
Yeah, look, I think we all have a place, when we vote and participate in our democracy. I guess I'd encourage every voter to be having that litmus test around, well, what is this doing for neighbours and community members that might be experiencing disadvantage, who wants to raise the rate and ensure that everyone could have a decent standard of living. So there's, just that role as a citizen. And those that work in food businesses as well often do donating or fundraising, or can host community events that help to raise the profile of food insecurity. And that's absolutely wonderful. And, a lot of ex-chefs or hospo staff end up working in emergency food organisations as well. And if they can really, take on that challenge of how can I deliver food in a way that does promote dignity, that does promote nutrition, that is, culturally inclusive and focused on what community wants rather than sort of top down. There are really wonderful versions of food relief and community food initiatives out there. So I think, the hospo sector, as you said, has a really great role to play, Dani, and is doing great things.
Yeah, I'm an ambassador for Fair Share, which is
brilliant,
which I think does really good work in reducing food waste and supplying culturally appropriate food to frontline organisations. And I know a lot of the chefs that work there find it enormously satisfying, and they are able to be in a creative mindset where it's dealing with, produce that sometimes is grown by Fair Share, but also produce that's donated, and just, turns up in the warehouse, and they wrangle it into delicious and nutritious meals. So certainly a different way of using those incredible skills that chefs have.
Brilliant, Dani. Yeah, Fair Share do great things. Totally agree.
Well, Rebecca, it's been so interesting to hear about your work. It's I feel like, there are all these different quote unquote food worlds, and sometimes they don't overlap as much as perhaps they could. So I'm really excited to dive into your food world for a little bit and to bring you into ours. Thank you so much for being part of Dirty Linen.
My pleasure, Dani. And I have just brought up that paper if you'd like me to close out with a quote that I was really touched by from my work on structural violence.
Oh, yes, please.
So this was one of my interviewees. She was 69 years old, When I asked her about what it was like for the very first time that she needed food charity, she described, I was really embarrassed. I went red. My heart was beating and I didn't know what to do. I was standing there and someone came up to me and said, have you got a pension card? And I said, yeah. And then they took me over to a table. They were asking me about myself and all this. They were really, really nice people. So I did feel really embarrassed. Even sometimes now when I go, I think, oh, geez, do I need to come? Can I get someone else to get it?
Oh, it's heartbreaking, isn't it?
It is, and I'm sorry to finish on that sadder note, Dani, but these are real people's experiences in food relief settings, but it does underscore all that we've talked about that need for alternative approaches and for big system change and upstream solutions so that everyone can eat well. And I know that's what Dirty Linen is all about.
Absolutely. And anyone can go to the Community Grocer in Carlton and check out what's there, right?
Yes, please.
So is it Fridays?
Every Friday morning in Carlton, every Tuesday morning in Fitzroy, and we're Thursday mornings in Pakenham, thecommunitygrocer.org.au.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thanks, Dani.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This